My name's Cassandra Hemingway, and I'm co-presenting here with Theron Laysleeper. We're the outreach team at the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District. And we have been providing Recycle Right webinars along with compost webinars and webinars about reducing and replacing toxins in your home all spring and throughout the summer. And today's is the last one that we're offering in 2020. But we are also going to be emailing a recording out to everybody who signed up. If you missed it or you log in late, you'll still get to see the whole thing. We are a small solid waste management district in Central Vermont. Our information is universal, but some of the specifics about what can be recycled are really focused on our region. So if you're from out of Central Vermont or a different state or country, check your local resources about what can be recycled in your area. But we still have some universal topics we're covering here. A couple quick housekeeping tips, and then I'll ask Theron to hop on. We are in part funded by the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture Rural Utility Service grant. So we want to give a shout out and a thank you to our grant funder. We also wanted to just let you know, I think everyone's probably fairly familiar with Zoom at this point, but I just want to point you to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to pop questions in there throughout the webinar. We do have a couple spots that we have set up where we stop and we'll answer one or two questions as we go. And then we usually save 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So don't be shy. If you have a comment that's not a question, please save that for the chat box and make sure you can make it visible to everybody. So that's another place where folks can comment. But if you just want to ask a question, please keep it to the Q&A box. It makes it easier for us. We don't have that many participants today, so it's probably not as big of a deal as when we get large numbers. I guess the last thing I want to say is, even though we are 6 months into the pandemic, a lot of us are still working from home, myself included. Theron's at the office today, so sometimes our internet cuts out or strange things happen because we're working from home. Just a heads up, that could happen, and we will roll with it, and we hope you will too. So Theron, you want to introduce yourself before we get started?
Hi, everybody. I'm Theron. I'm the outreach coordinator at the district, and I'm excited to talk to you all about how to improve our recycling practices.
Awesome. Okay, I'll go over the overview, and then we'll get started. Sometimes our Prezi hops around a little bit. Okay. So today we're going to talk about basic blue bin recycling. And in Vermont, we have a universal recycling law that's officially known as Act 148. So we will spend a little time just reviewing the law and talking about what actually goes in your blue bin, what stays out. And then we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about what stays out. That's contamination, and why contamination is such an issue with recycling and how to avoid it. We also will go a little bit deeper and talk about materials that can and should be recycled. They just don't go in your blue bin. There's a lot of other items besides the basic recyclables that have outlets that don't need to go in the trash. And then we have a Q&A set up. So Theron's going to start by talking about the law.
All right. So Act 148 is the universal recycling law in Vermont, and it covers a number of things. Today we're talking just about the recyclables, but it also covers food scraps and clean wood and leaf and yard waste and some other things that should not be landfilled, and that's what the law is about. So recyclables have been banned from the landfill since 2015. The food scraps have also been banned from landfilling for large generators like businesses and grocery stores. And more recently, it's been required for all residents in Vermont to divert their food scraps and keep them out of the trash since July 1st this year. And then, as I mentioned, leaf and yard waste and clean wood are also banned from landfilling. It's because all of these materials have higher and better reuse value, and there are just better things to do with them. They can be reused or repurposed or are otherwise valuable. So recycling in a pandemic, it's an essential service, just as trash hauling is. We don't want all this material just piling up on the streets. So it's been a lot of work for all of the haulers, and we're all very thankful for their hard work, both in terms of keeping up with all of the waste that we're generating. People are generating more waste at home, generally, since people have been spending more time at home. And the haulers have been doing a great job of staying safe, implementing safety protocols around the COVID-19 virus, and making sure that everybody's recycling and trash are getting picked up on time and safely. So thank all of your haulers and your recyclers. Some pickups have been changing a little bit in simple ways, like the haulers are asking people to put their materials out the night before and not to come out and greet the workers. That's just to keep the distancing protocols in place and make sure that they can do their job safely. Aside from that, not much has changed. The trash and recycling still need to be picked up, and they are, and everything's running just as it should. And when we're talking about the recyclables that are banned from the landfill, this includes 6 categories of material. These we refer to as mandatory recycling, and that includes paper, glass, steel, aluminum, cardboard, and rigid plastics, and that's it. These materials go in your blue bin or in your recycling stream. Everything else stays out. And I'm going to say that again, everything else stays out. Anything else is contamination. The recycling system is designed to pick up these specific materials and sort them out and get them to the places where they can be remanufactured and repurposed into new things. And if other things get into the stream, they have to be picked out, they have to be sorted out, and that takes time, it takes labor, and it costs a lot of money. So everything that we can do to reduce contamination is really helpful, both for the resale value of the materials that we're recycling and for the time and energy that the recycling haulers have to expend on this process. So, Cassandra, do you want to get into a little bit more detail about what falls under each of these categories?
Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah, so Theron, that was a great overview. And the bulk of what we're talking about today is what goes in your bin, but also what should not go in your bin. So I'm going to go through all of those 6 categories of materials, and there are some exceptions for each one. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about what each category is and why certain parts of those categories don't go in your bin. So are you ready to? All right. So paper, aluminum, cardboard, steel, glass. We're going to start with paper. As soon as the slide moves, we always have a little delay. We're both in separate locations, so sometimes there's a delay. Okay, so paper's pretty obvious, but there are some exceptions. Obviously, office paper, glossy paper, junk mail, inserts, magazines, those are all considered paper. Boxboard, like the, like your cereal comes in, or even frozen food boxes, that's also in the category of paper. There are exceptions though. If the paper is wet or moldy, that stays out, that's contaminated. Hardcover books, the actual paper inside is recyclable, but the hardcover isn't. So that would become contamination. And yes, people do recycle books. Sometimes there are books that just become, you know, no longer relevant, like old textbooks, that kind of thing. Old encyclopedias. So if you need to recycle a book, cut the cover off. Any paper that's lined with plastic, and I used to see that in dog food bags sometimes, or pet food bags. It'd be paper on the outside and a plastic liner on the inside. If you want to take the plastic liner out, you can recycle the paper, but otherwise that is not recyclable because it's two materials. And this actually introduces a concept that is helpful to remember if you're wondering if something's recyclable. The materials that are recyclable are one material, just paper, nothing else, no coated paper, no plastic paper, just paper. So if you can remember that when you see something that if you look hard at it, if you see more than one material, that does not get recycled. There isn't really a machine that can carefully separate plastic liner from a paper outer wrap. And that's why things like disposable coffee cups are not recyclable. They are actually lined with a very thin layer of plastic. So if you keep that in mind, you'll see the pattern. The paper is the raw material that goes into the system to be remanufactured into other paper products. And the same thing with plastics, glass, and metals. So as long as you have that one material and nothing else, that's the first place to start. As soon as you see that it's two, it doesn't go in your bin. And another example of that is like your milk cartons, Tetra Pak, which would be like those soy milk, the rectangular cartons. Those are all made of multiple different materials that are very carefully meshed together. There actually are some recycling programs for those gable top cartons and Tetra Pak, but we don't have those available in Vermont. So if you live in Vermont, those are not recyclable, and unfortunately they do go in your trash. Lastly, on paper, I just want to point out shredded paper. This image doesn't really show how you're supposed to recycle shredded paper, which is why we called attention to it. You wouldn't just throw it in your bin. It actually should go into a clear plastic bag that you tie. And we actually will be spending quite a bit of time talking about why you don't put plastic bags in your recycling bin, but this is the one exception for shredded paper. And the reason is because all of your recyclables, or at least most of them in Vermont, will go to a materials recovery facility. That is, we call it a MRF, and that's where the materials get sorted by machine, by humans, by blowers, by magnets. And the first pass, when humans are kind of sorting out the contamination, if they see a bag in there and it's not clear and they can't see what's in it, they're just going to throw it away. It's just going to be trash. If it's a clear plastic bag and they can see that it's shredded paper, it'll go through and get recycled. So that's the one way. The other thing you can do with shredded paper is if you compost in your backyard, it's a great carbon material to add to your compost bin, which is what I do with it. So next slide, please. We're going to go on and talk about cardboard. A little bit simpler. Cardboard is pretty basic, just corrugated cardboard. Think of a cardboard box. And yes, pizza boxes are okay in Vermont. That didn't used to be the case, but a few years ago that changed. You just take out, there's usually a little piece of wax paper that goes under the pizza, and make sure there's no actual food debris. If it's just a grease stain, that's fine. So that's changed. Feel free to put your pizza boxes in recycling now. And the same thing as with paper, no wet, moldy, or plastic lined cardboard, and no waxed cardboard. So waxed cardboard would be, often you find those at a grocery store. They're used for shipping produce. That's not recyclable. Those go in the trash when you're done with them. So next slide. Aluminum. Aluminum is an amazing material. It can be recycled indefinitely and never degrades. So if you're going to only recycle one thing, please make it aluminum, because it's a disastrous process to mine it and create things like aluminum foil. Very, very, a lot of energy goes into that process. But it can be recycled and not lose any value, unlike paper, which slowly goes to lower and lower value materials as it gets recycled. So of course, aluminum cans, think of your beer, soda cans, that kind of thing. But there are a couple other aluminum materials that you can recycle that not everybody's aware of. I mean, like your pie plates, if you have those disposable aluminum pie plates, just make sure that they're cleaned off. And aluminum foil can be recycled. It should be clean and dry and balled up. And this is where we introduce the 2x2 rule. When you are recycling aluminum, the ball should be around the size of a tennis ball. So if you don't have enough foil to make a ball that size, just save it somewhere until you do. You can actually recycle, if anyone out there is a yogurt eater, there's usually a foil lining that you peel off the top of the yogurt container. That can go, rinse it off, and that can be recycled with aluminum foil. Sometimes I even recycle like the foil that, wraps chocolate bars. Just save it all in one place, and when you have enough to ball it up to be the size of a tennis ball or bigger, then you can just toss that right in your bin. If it's smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches, then it's contamination. And that has to do with how the MRF works and the machinery, anything smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches falls through the cracks and becomes problematic. So just save enough till you have, I think a tennis ball is a good size. It's a little bigger than 2 inches across, but it's a good guideline. And with aluminum, we're just talking about foil pie tins, cans. We're not talking about aluminum siding, scrap metal, pots and pans. Those also can be recycled, but you would bring those to a metal recycler. In our district, that would be Bulldogs Recycling or Gate Salvage or All Metals Recycling in Hardwick. Waiting for the next slide. Steel in the recycle bin typically refers to those food grade cans. So this is a great example of a really messy can that would require some rinsing or cleaning. But often if it's just like tomato sauce or beans or vegetables or fruit, those cans just need a rinse out, and it's just rinse it, shake out the extra wet and put it in the bin. For something really like this would be a sardine can or tuna or something like that, you might want to go over it with a little warm water and soap and a sponge. It is important to rinse out food containers that have had food or beverages in them. They don't need to be sterilized. They don't need to be washed to the same level that you would wash your dishes that you're going to eat off of again. Just wash them so there's no more food residue. And for some, that means more washing than others. And then for steel, leave out of your recycling bin appliances. Appliances also fit into our 2x2 rule, because not only do you keep out anything smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches, but nothing larger than 2 feet by 2 feet. And that's just for the way that the MRF is set up for handling materials. So like white appliances and that kind of thing can be recycled with a metal recycler, but not in your recycling bin. Same thing with scrap metal. The pesticide spray cans would all go to, and paint cans have other outlets as well, which we'll talk about later. Glass. So glass, all colored glass can be recycled in Vermont. And typically this is another one where we're usually talking about glass that has contained a beverage of some sort or food. Things like pickle jars, mayonnaise jars, some peanut butter jars, bottles, wine bottles. Glass is a material, Theron will talk about later, that loses a lot of value when it gets recycled. When you recycle it in a single sort system, like most of our district in central Vermont is single sort recycling, meaning it all goes into the same bin and gets sorted later when it goes to the MRF. So there are some recycling centers around that still sort glass by color and papers by, newspaper and office paper. Those places are getting a much higher value when they sell their materials. With a single sort, it's all going in one bin, it goes to the MRF, it gets contaminated no matter how hard we try, and it loses value. And that's the case with glass. It is important to recycle it, but it's not going to be recycled into another wine bottle. It's going to be used for, the glass will be used as a different product after it's recycled. And just keep in mind, no window glass, light bulb, ceramics, or broken glass. If you do have a broken glass, that just goes in a paper bag or box in your trash bag. So hard plastics, this is a tricky category. We used to really talk about the numbers 1 through 7 with it inside the chasing arrows, the symbol. A lot of people, and myself included, were trained to look for the recycle symbol, and then you would have to know which number your recycling center takes. And that's still the case in some areas. There are parts of Vermont where they're only recycling numbers 1 and 2. And that's all that's required in the universal recycling law. But in our area, we do take numbers 1 through 7. So if you live somewhere where they are recycling all 1 through 7 plastics, then it's less important to see the recycle symbol with the number. And you just think about, is this a hard, like a rigid plastic, or is it a flexible plastic? So a flexible plastic would be like a plastic bag. We call that plastic film. A hard plastic would be like a peanut butter jar or a laundry bottle or that kind of a thing, or a water bottle. There are some rules, there's a bunch of rules around plastic. It all comes back to the same thing, which is make sure it's not dirty with food debris, but you don't have to sterilize it or go nuts. Make sure it's just exactly what's on the list and nothing else. So you can see there's an X over this white plastic trash bag. Bags, any bags, plastic bags, except for that one exception around shredded paper, stay out of your recycling bin. And you'll see a great illustration in a little while why that's so important. Styrofoam may have the symbol on it, but it's not recyclable in our area. There are places where you can recycle styrofoam, but not in Vermont. And that's about market. We just don't have enough people generating enough material to make it worth the expense and the travel to recycle styrofoam. So that goes in the trash. And if you don't like putting in the trash, a great option is to avoid using it when you can. Loose bottle caps, you see the red X over that. Loose bottle caps stay out of the trash, out of the recycling bin, because those are smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches. That you can just screw them back on the bottle, and you can see in the images below that's what has happened. So again, that's a rule that changed a few years ago, but our MRF is now set up to take bottles with the caps on them. So if you want to make sure those little plastic caps get recycled, rinse out your bottle, shake it out. It doesn't have to be perfectly arid and dry, but just shake it out so there's no real water in there. Put the cap back on and toss it in the bin. And then this last one over all the way on the left, the green spray bottle with the skull and crossbones is indicating that's a hazardous material. Those don't go in the recycle bin. We have special household hazardous collections for like pesticide containers and that kind of thing. And the last thing on the list that stays out is black plastics. That literally means that plastic that's the color black. Like I'm thinking of rotisserie chicken usually comes in a tray that's black with a clear cover. Sushi often comes in a black. Those, Theron will tell you in more detail why that can't be recycled in Vermont, but just know if it's a black plastic, that's trash. Next slide. So the numbers, this is what I was just referring to. The numbers do have meaning, and we actually would include a link. We have created a handout that has this for any, because we always have people who really like to know more about these numbers. So when you get your follow-up email from us, you'll get a handout with it. That's basically this image. And it's really helpful to kind of give you an idea of what can be recycled and what can't. Well, not even that. It's not helpful for that. It's just helpful to tell you what each number means for what kind of plastic it is. But you can see like number 4, that's often shopping bags, bread bags, 6-pack rings. Those are all flexible plastics that we don't want in the bin. You know, there's often styrofoam. I forget which number foam is polystyrene, number 6. So that's why I'm saying don't look at the numbers in our area, just look at if it's a rigid or hard plastic. If that changes, believe me, we'll be putting out the alert. But right now it's more about, is it a hard plastic or a flexible plastic? Next slide. So bottom line, in our area, we recycle hard plastics. It's really important to know what goes in and what does not go in the bin. What I gave you was an overview. Theron will be going into more detail in a minute. And if you're not sure, check with your local solid waste management district. There's something like 16 of them in the state of Vermont, and every state has some version of what we call solid waste management districts. Sometimes it's a function of this municipality you live in, but if you just Google it, you'll find it. And one more slide before we take a break for questions. This is sort of an introduction to what Theron is going to go into in a minute. Know the rules. Yes, it's simple. Put in the items on the list, keep out the items not on the list, but there are a few rules. There are some things that aren't just contamination when they go in the bin, but they cause real problems and can be dangerous. And believe it or not, plastic bags and textiles are in that category. And I'll let Theron tell you more about why those are problematic. Knowing that your recyclables should be clean and dry, that was a theme throughout every material. And the 2x2 rule, no smaller than 2 inches by 2 inches and nothing larger than 2 feet by 2 feet. There is one exception though. In central Vermont, it's okay to put used 5-gallon buckets in your recycle bin as long as the metal handle's taken off. But that's the only exception. Otherwise, so, you know, those great big bulky plastic bins, that kind of thing, can't be recycled in Vermont. And remember, no bags except for shredded paper. And lastly, this is a lot of us who love to reduce waste hate this one, but the reality is if you're not sure, throw it out. If in doubt, throw it out, because your materials are going to have higher value and be more likely to actually get recycled if they are not contaminated with things that don't belong in the bin. So with that, we're going to take a break for questions, and then Theron's going to talk more about what is contamination. And right now I'm only seeing one question from Emily. Emily asks, caffeinated drinks, are these cans recycled or tossed in the trash? I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, Emily. Feel free to just pop in the Q&A box and elaborate. I'm thinking if it's a can, yes, it can be recycled. Just rinse it out like you would any can. I did mention that disposable coffee cups aren't recyclable, so I wonder if that's what you're referring to.
I would add that it doesn't matter what's been in the container. It matters what material the container is made of. So again, that's steel, aluminum, plastic, cardboard, and paper. Those are the and glass. Those are the recyclable items in your blue bin.
All right. That's our only question right now. We'll take another break after Theron talks about contamination.
All right. So, yeah, so does it really get recycled? That depends on whether or not they can get the items. Well, it depends on whether or not it's recyclable, for one. If it's on the list, the statewide 6, it's recyclable, it gets into the blue bin, it's the right size, it'll get recycled. If it's contamination, they're gonna have to pull it out and it won't get recycled. In Vermont, we have mostly domestic markets for our recycling materials. That's not always the case, and sometimes those materials are sent elsewhere, internationally. But regardless, it's important that we reduce the contamination in our recyclables and make sure that we're providing the cleanest stream of materials that we can so that the recyclers can then remarket them and actually get a decent price on the materials that they're selling down the line. So yes, markets fluctuate, and recently, or in the past couple of years, it's been in the news that for example, China increased their standards for what they would accept, and what they did is they put a contamination limit on the materials that they're taking, which essentially shut down all of the material imports from the United States because they were all highly contaminated. And that's another issue in and of itself. But the best thing that we can do is reduce our contamination and make sure that we're handling the materials properly, make sure that they're getting to the right place and in good condition so that they are valuable and can be resold and ultimately recycled. Another thing that's been in the news is glass. So glass is, it is kind of a hard thing to recycle. If you're going to recycle it, you have to melt it. It can be reused, for example, in roadways as fill, but there aren't a lot of great ways to reuse glass. It's very cheap to make. And so personally, I would recommend just trying to either reuse glass containers that you use or avoid them and go with something like cardboard or aluminum that's more recyclable. This is a picture of some contamination at the paper mill in Sheldon, Vermont, and this is all material that has been filtered out of the paper that they process there. The way that works is they have a big tub of hot water that makes all the cardboard and the paper they take in soggy. They grind it up, and then they have an elaborate system of filters and screens that remove this unwanted material. This might be, for example, little plastic windows in spaghetti boxes, or it might be some plastics that have ended up in the paper. It might also be waxed cardboard. Things like that are not actually recyclable need to be filtered out before they can reuse that material. They liquefy it, and then they print it out in sheets and on giant rolls that they can then cut new spaghetti boxes and things out of. So that's how that process works. And as you can see, there is a lot of contamination that they have to deal with. And the better a job we can do in reducing that, the easier it is for them to continue operating and to process that material and then ultimately get it reused and recycled. That's just a close-up here. All right, so again, anything that's not on the list of mandated recyclables is considered contamination. And the biggest issue with contamination is tanglers. So this next image is from the Materials Recovery Facility, the MRF, in Chittenden, I believe. And as you can see, they have some workers in there who are cutting out a bunch of plastic bags and wires and hoses and cords and textiles, so cloth and fabric. All these things are referred to as tanglers because they get all wound up in the sorting machinery. These are rotating cogs that move the material up the conveyor belt so that it can be sorted. But all of those long, stringy, stretchy things, they have the potential to get wrapped around these, and the whole facility needs to shut down. I can't remember how frequently, but it needs to shut down every once in a while. I guess it depends on how much contamination is present, but it needs to shut down, and they have to send people in to cut all that stuff out. And that's a really big problem because it stops the whole operation, and they have to send people in there to work on it, and it really slows things down and reduces the efficiency and thereby the viability of the whole process. So that's something to pay special attention to. Make sure that you're not putting anything in the recycling bin that could be wound up or clog this kind of machinery. So here's an example of some of the tanglers that people can sometimes put in. Plastic bags, garden hoses, clothing, electrical wires, things like that often are the culprits of clogged machinery. Another item that's considered contamination is things like bottle caps, small things that are smaller than 2 by 2. They fall through the gaps in the machinery, and they end up getting ground up with the glass and contaminating that glass product. So those kinds of things should be kept out. With bottle caps, you can actually just leave them right on the container. If they're the same material, like a plastic bottle and a plastic cap, they can stay on. If you have a glass container and a metal cap, and it's big enough, you can take that off. Coffee cups, Cassandra mentioned that. Those are 2 materials fused into one, so those are not recyclable. That's a contamination. Soiled paper plates. So if you think of a dirty paper plate, like from a cookout, it's going to be, maybe it's going to have some grease on it. It might have food. That's going to attract bugs and rodents and create a health issue for the people who are working on the lines, who are sorting your recycling every day. So that should stay out. That can just go in the trash. The same thing with tissues and napkins like that. For one, they're too small, and the other thing is that they're usually dirty with some kind of food that will attract bugs and rodents. So, and then we come back to the black plastics. Cassandra mentioned this before, but black plastics are not recyclable in Vermont. They are generally made with a filler and dyed, and so they're not high quality plastics. They're the kind of plastics you see on like sushi trays or rotisserie chicken maybe, or some like mushroom containers in the grocery store. Those kinds of things are made of basically a cheap black plastic, and it's not recyclable in Vermont. So remember, if it's a black plastic, to keep it out of your recycling and just go ahead and put it right in the trash. And if you don't like that, don't buy it. Buy something else. Use your own containers. Do something that will reduce your use of those kinds of materials, because they're not recyclable. Cassandra mentioned a lot of these other things, but in this image on the left, you see food residue, you see textiles and bags, scrap metal. Those are big materials. Those can be recycled at scrap metal collection places. Electronics, those have a special recycling program, and they need to be handled carefully because they have a lot of heavy metals in them that we don't want to get landfilled. They also have high reuse value. You can take those things apart and resell them, and they can be remanufactured as well. The other thing that we have on this list is batteries. Batteries are, they also have a dedicated recycling program in Vermont. They're free to recycle for residents, but they can also be dangerous in recycling facilities. If they're crushed, or if they still hold a charge, they can react, and they can start fires or explode. And I think we have here some headlines of some instances where that was very destructive. People, for whatever reason, a battery ended up in the recycling, and it ended up burning down a couple of different facilities. So it's very important that you make sure that those batteries that you are getting rid of go to the right place. A lot of hardware stores and pretty much anywhere that sells batteries will take those for recycling. You might see the call to recycle boxes, and if you go to the call to recycle website, it also has a locator. You can type in your zip code, and it'll show you all the places that take batteries near you. We also take those at the Additional Recyclables Collection Center over in Barrie. So there's definitely some danger involved with those batteries, and that's something to pay attention to. As I mentioned, all these kinds of contamination have different issues associated with them, but they jam machinery, they can be dangerous, and they also just slow everything down. They can stall the machinery, stall the facility, and they can also ruin other materials around them. So like the battery that gets crushed and is next to a bunch of paper might burn it, and that would be bad. All right, so we have another question section. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to jump on.
Hey, Theron, so we don't have any questions lined up right now.
All right.
So I say let's keep going.
Okay.
I did want to say, like, follow up on those headlines about the batteries. One of those fires that was referred to, I think it was the one in Tioga County, that burned for 3 days. They just couldn't put it out; it was too hot. And it was started by a lithium-ion battery, which I believe was in a cell phone. Someone threw their cell phone in the recycling. So we are going to talk more. Theron mentioned call to recycle. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the improper recycling of things like batteries or electronics can really cause massive property damage and harm people, which is why we're doing this webinar. Yeah, so there's no questions right now, so let's keep going. And I'd like to invite folks who are logged in to throw your questions up in that question and answer box, and we will have a little session at the end. We're like 3/4 of the way through here, and so we'll spend a few minutes when we're done with more questions.
All right.
So let's talk about how to reduce waste. We know how to recycle. We know it's imperfect. We know that it requires some vigilance on our parts to make sure that we are recycling only what goes in the bin and not recycling what doesn't. And we also know that just because it doesn't go in the recycling bin doesn't mean it can't be recycled. It just means it can't be recycled in that system. So there are a lot of other options for most materials in your house. Not all, but most. So we're going to talk about some of them. Let's go to the next slide. And I think we're going to be talking about special recycling. First, plastic bags. So I think we started with plastic bags because it's such a ubiquitous item. They're found everywhere. They're in the ocean. They float up and get tangled in trees. Even in places like Vermont, where we now have a plastic bag ban. Plastic overwrap plastic bags are everywhere. And it's the #1 contaminant problem. And I don't need to go into detail because you already saw exactly why it's a problem in recycling. And in the landfill, plastic bags actually do release chemicals that are hazardous to our health when they are in landfill conditions, and leachate is leaching off some of the chemicals from them, which I cannot go through the list right now, but so landfilling and recycling bin are not options for plastic bags, but there are some recycling options, especially for these materials you see here. This picture of shirts is actually supposed to illustrate a dry cleaner bag. The bags that your bread comes in, the overwrap over paper towels and toilet paper, basic shopping bags, a newspaper overwrap. You get the idea. If it's a clear or see-through plastic, like the shopping bags aren't clear, but they are thin enough that you can see through them. And also, if you pull it and it stretches a little bit, as opposed to think of something more crinkly, like the plastic that goes over a tea box or something. If you pull that, it just tears apart. That is not a recyclable plastic. But if you pull your plastic film and you get a little bit of a stretch, that can go into a plastic bag recycling. And for most places that I know of, plastic bag recycling typically happens at grocery stores, at the major grocery store chains. And the reason for that is because the grocery stores are hauling these huge trucks, are coming and dropping off food every day, and then they go back to where they came from. And when they go back, they've got an empty truck. So they can afford the cost of hauling very lightweight plastic bags because it's just back hauling for them anyway, and then they can recycle those and have a little income from that. It's not a valuable material for regular recyclers, which is why you don't see it in your blue bin or other streams. And that's why it's associated with like Walmart and other stores that are already having great big long haul trucks coming and going every day. So I think major national chain grocery stores around here, that would be Shaw's, Hannaford's, Price Chopper, Walmart, although with COVID-19, Walmart stopped their plastic bag recycling, but you can check and see if when they're restarting it. But if you aren't sure where to go, there's a website, plasticfilmrecycling.org. And that's a really great, they have a locator on there. So you can just type in your zip code and or the city you're in, and they'll show you where the closest plastic bag recycling outlets are near you. A couple of little things about plastic bag recycling. These systems are set up really for residents, for householders. They're not set up for businesses to drop off the kind of quantity that you would get. Like, you know, we've had businesses try to drop off the plastic wrap that comes around the pallets that they get, and that kind of thing. That's too much materials for these grocery store plastic bag recycling. But if you are just shopping in a grocery store anyway, bring your plastic bag recycling, just drop it off as you walk in the store. Also, one more thing about this website, plasticfilmrecycling.org. They also show you some of the materials the plastic bags are made out of after they're recycled. And a lot of that is, I think the company is Trex Recycling, and they make things like benches and plastic, like a plastic kind of lumber and that kind of thing. Next slide, please. Okay, special recycling. This symbol is specific to Vermont. Some of our solid waste management entity colleagues created this to, I think actually maybe the state did. This indicates what we call extended producer responsibility items. So these are items that each one of them has actually legislation attached to it that is what we call EPR, or producer responsibility, extended producer responsibility. And what it means is that the law requires the manufacturers or producers of these items to manage the material at the end of life. And the reason why you see these materials, paint, fluorescent bulbs, batteries, electronics, mercury containing devices, these are all items that are highly toxic. And if they're landfilled, they release very, very highly toxic and dangerous chemicals. You heard about batteries, but there's other issues with batteries releasing toxins as well. And fluorescent bulbs, for example, contain mercury. These are materials that when they are leaching and contributing to leachate in a landfill, they are releasing poisons into our air and water systems that are dangerous to humans and the environment. So we have these EPR programs. These aren't in every state. They're fantastic. Some of the producers fought the bills and now they're managing these materials beautifully. Some of them wanted them. The battery, when the battery bill went through in the, I think it was 2015 or 14 that it passed, the battery manufacturers were in the State House lobbying for the bill because they can get back the batteries and recycle some of those components, which are heavy metals and very expensive. And the way it works is the manufacturers, they partner with the state of Vermont, and typically they'll hire a third party that will manage the materials. So paint is a great example. There's a company called Paint Care. And so the paint manufacturers and the state of Vermont both contribute to Paint Care, and Paint Care manages paint. So Paint Care sets up collection sites all over the state. Usually they try to make those at the point of purchase. That's why a lot of hardware stores will take paint back, and paint stores like Sherwin-Williams. It's not always the point of purchase. Recycling centers like the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District operates a facility we call the ARCC, that stands for Additional Recyclables Collection Center, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we can take all the EPR materials at our facility. So it's a little trickier because you have to, if you're not sure where to drop it off, you might have to go to a different website for each material to find it. I will say we take all of these materials at our facility in Barrie, but each one of these materials has its third-party collection organization that has a zip code locator on the website. And if we go to the next slide, I'll show you those websites. They're real easy to remember. And you will get a copy of this presentation, so you could maybe screenshot this page if you want. Paintcare.com, lamprecycle.com, VTE Cycles, calltorecycle.com, thermostatrecycle.com. They're all These are all places that will tell you everything you need to know about this item. Sometimes, like in the Paint Care website, they also have information about how to reduce the amount of paint you buy when you're starting a project so you don't have as much left over. They have many more details about exactly what materials they can accept. Some of them, the program, it's free for you to use, but it's only up to a certain number of items, and then there's a fee after that. So you can get more details about that. And again, at our facility, the ARC, we can take all of these, and there's no upfront cost when you drop them off. This is all, I actually should not have used the word free, because this is usually when you buy an item, there's a small add-on fee that pays for the recycling of it. So it's not free, you've already paid for it, but you don't have to pay that fee when you're ready to recycle. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the ARC. At the ARC, this is a unique facility in Vermont. There's only a couple more like it around the country. There are plenty of other recycling facilities that take hard to recycle materials, but we take almost 40. We have changed our list recently. We had to take some materials off the list that were related to COVID for various reasons, but we were able to add some at the same time. We are dealing with, we call it additional recyclables, but really we're talking about hard to recycle materials. And because they're hard to recycle, the reason they're hard to recycle is there aren't really markets developed for them. So in a way, we are sort of an experimental recycling lab where experimental is maybe too strong of a word, but we are accepting materials, and sometimes the markets just die and we can't take the material anymore. So we tell people, if you are planning to come to our facility, check our website first, because we have all of the current updates on our ARC page on the website. That's cvswmd.org/ARCC. And we keep an updated brochure that you can download or print off of your own computer as well. We do ask, if you are planning to use the ARC, that you only bring us what you see on the list. It absolutely doesn't work when people start bringing in things. If you don't see it on the list, don't bring it in. You can email or call ahead to ask if you're not sure, but it's actually, we can't deal with contamination any more than the MRF or other recyclers can. Sorry, there's a bug in front of me. And like I said, the list changes pretty regularly. Sometimes it's, month to month, sometimes it's quarterly. We just changed it about a month and a half ago. We haven't had any changes recently. But even if you already have a brochure, you should check the website just to make sure it's still current. Okay, next slide. This is where I take the hammer and hammer home the point. Oh, nope, this isn't that slide. We do have a few rules if you're going to use the ARC. This is a self-sort facility. And with COVID-19, we are actually asking people to pre-sort your materials. It is a little bit of a pain because there are potentially up to 40 different kinds of materials you can bring. And some of them are really weird little things like oral care products. We can recycle toothbrushes and toothpaste tubes. Small metals like bottle caps and paper clips and hinges and those kinds of things. Pellet bags we take for recycling. Batteries, of course, everything on the EPR list. So we ask that you really look at the website and understand if there's any preparation you need to do. For example, pellet bags have to be cut open, so it's just one sheet of plastic and shaken off, and that is another contamination prevention. Every pellet bag, even if you shake all the little pellets out, has a little sawdust on the bottom, even if it's just a fine dust. That, when you combine the thousands of bags we get, that actually becomes significant contamination. So there's a reason for everything we ask folks to do. So if you come in with it pre-sorted and prepared, batteries need to be taped on the terminal ends, etc. Double check that you're not bringing anything that's not on the list. In part, this saves our staff time and your time, but it also means we're limiting the amount of time you're in the facility, which is really important with the COVID. We are open, but we kind of want people to move through and get in and get out as quickly as possible. So we all limit our contact with each other. And never mind this last bullet, I'm overdue for taking this off. We used to allow had some materials people could collect for free, but we've stopped doing that with COVID just because it ends up encouraging people to hang around and linger, and we needed to stop that for the time being. So no collecting. And now the next slide is where we hammer home the point and just remind you, check the website at cvswmd.org/ARCC. So that was an overview of a few special recycling materials, but I would encourage you, if you have something, if you don't live in Central Vermont and you can't come to the ARC, or if you live in a state that doesn't have EPR programs, or you have something that's just not covered by any of this, Google it. There's all kinds of strange recycling options out there that you can find. And if you're committed and interested, just like do an internet search and see if there are any recycling options available for the item you're looking for. I think our next slide is our question slide. Nope. Okay, we're going to power through. We do have a few questions, but we have a Q&A coming up soon. Theron's going to hop on and just talk about, okay, we've talked about recycling in your blue bin. We've talked about extra recycling you can do, but there's plenty you can do before you ever recycle to reduce what you have in the first place, so you don't even have to deal with recycling. And that's what Theron's going to talk to you about now.
All right. So, yeah, recycling is good. But the less waste you produce, the less you'll have to deal with. So if you can take some simple steps in planning and preparing before you need to, buy or use other materials that will then need to be disposed of, you can cut down on the whole process. So if you think about your day, you bring with you a water bottle, a mug, maybe a spoon or a packed lunch. If you can do that, you'll cut down a lot on the things you'll need to purchase and use during the day. You won't need to get like a water bottle you won't need to buy water, you won't need to buy food, you won't need to use a plastic fork to eat your lunch, those kinds of things. If you're able to bring those with you, you'll be able to reduce your waste a lot, and it adds up. I mean, if you bring a spoon in your backpack every day versus getting a plastic spoon every day at lunch, that's quite a lot of waste. That's, for a year, one spoon a day, that would be a huge amount of waste. And then the other thing you can do is besides reduce, you can reuse things. So if you get a takeout container, you can reuse it. If you get a jar and has some, say, spaghetti sauce in it, you can reuse that too. You can put something in it. You can store things in it. You can also buy secondhand clothing, buy things at a thrift store, things like that. And you can also bring old clothing that doesn't fit to a thrift store or to a vintage store. That kind of practice will extend the life of the things that you use, whether or not you're able to reuse them. Maybe somebody else can, and the same thing in reverse. Shopping bags and produce bags, that's the kind of thing that you can tuck into your car or your backpack when you go out. So you don't need to get new plastic bags, which are now banned in Vermont. There's some exceptions, obviously, but if you bring your own bag, you won't need to get one at the store. And then there are other simple things like straws and napkins and bags and unnecessary packaging. I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but most people can get by without a straw. You can just drink out of a cup or a bottle. Straws may be necessary for people who can't but then you can also get reusable straws. You can get metal ones. Paper napkins. Oftentimes, if you go to a restaurant or get takeout, they'll give you a lot of paper napkins. You can just say that you don't want them, and you can bring a paper or a cloth napkin with you. Bring a handkerchief. That will save you a lot of waste. You won't need to throw all those paper napkins away, and we'll talk a little bit about unnecessary packaging here in a minute. So this is just a way of thinking about it. If you start out with whatever you have available to you and try to make do with that, that's the first step. You can also borrow things. A lot of people, they'll share cars or vehicles. If you need to move something, you can also do swaps and trades with friends and family. I mentioned thrift shopping, or go to yard sales. Get things that are used. They'll be cheaper. You'll save money, and you'll also be able to give these things a second life. And then if you like to make things, that's another great way to reduce the waste that you produce. This is nothing against buying things, but when you are thinking of purchases, think about what the side effects are. Are you buying something that you're going to need to throw away later? Are you just buying garbage, or are you buying something that's going to last, that's going to be valuable, that's either recyclable or reusable in the future? So let's talk a little bit about things we want to avoid, things we want to refuse. We talked about straws and plastic forks and plastic utensils. We don't need those things. You can carry around a spoon in your purse or your backpack easily enough and save yourself a lifetime of plastic utensils that you'll need to throw away and will end up filling up the landfill. Same thing with paper napkins, handkerchief. I mean, it's pretty simple if you can just remember to bring those things with you. And then I want to recommend to people to avoid unnecessary packaging. Things that don't need extra packaging, like a potato. It has a skin on it. A banana has a perfectly good peel. It doesn't need to be wrapped in plastic aside from that. There are also, these are just some of the things that we have gathered and that we have sold in the past from the district. These are ways of reducing your waste by planning ahead, bringing things with you. There's some utensil sets, there's some produce bags, but these are just examples. You can grab any old spoon out of your kitchen drawer. You can bring an old plastic bag that you got from the grocery store before and reuse that. You can bring some sort of backpack or cloth bag. All these things are ways of reducing the material waste that you're producing in your everyday life. And everything that you can do does contribute and make a difference. So let's move on to the final question and answer section. And Cassandra, if you want to jump back on, we'll take some questions.
Right. We have a few questions. Some of them I think we already answered. Like Anne asks, can you talk about plastic bag recycling? And that might have been right before we did. Valerie asks if folks will receive a recording. Yes, everyone who is registered for the webinar will get a recording of it. And now that you're on our email list, you certainly can opt out if you want to, but we will be sending out an email with a recording of all the webinars we've been doing for our webinar series this spring and summer. So keep an eye out for that as well. So Emily says plastic bags can be recycled into new products, correct? Yes, that's the whole point of recycling. When items are recycled, they go through a long process, but especially plastic, they just get repelletized and then they get used to create new products. And plastic bags are among those, yes, if they're recycled correctly the way we talked about. I think that's all our questions. If anyone would like to add one, we have one question that's Emily just says, thank you for this very detailed presentation. Thank you for logging on. Very much appreciate it. I think I'm not seeing any more questions coming in.
All right, great.
So I guess we're done. You will get a follow-up email from us. And if you think of a follow-up question, it's fine if you want to email us or contact the district. We're happy to answer your questions that way as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.